Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People, a podcast about role-playing games and the weird, wonderful people behind them.
Hello, wonderful weirdos. This is Diogo Nogueira, and today's guest is the very special Richard Ruane, creator of the award-winning Moonlight in Roseville Beach. But before we get into that, I would like to remind you to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast so you receive updates when we release new episodes. And if you like the show, please leave us a review wherever you listen to it. And if you have any coins left for your last adventure, check out the show notes to see how you can support the show and help us pay the bills to keep this thing going. And now let's get back to Richard Ruane. Richard Ruane is the man behind Our Rook Press. He makes many great things, not only Moonlight Roseville Beach, he has the Barrow Keep, Den of Thieves, who was nominated by the IGDN Groundbreaker Award for the best setting in 2022, 2021, and in 2022 he was nominated for Dark Designs in Verdigris, and he's also made many other great RPG things. We talked about techniques he's working on to keep writing, such as writing sprint. We talked about many games he made, his creative process, how he thinks always about setting first, and then he explored rules. We talked about influences, artists, and works that inspired his own work, interest in horror movies like Hammer films, many games and desires that we admire and that somehow we still learn from their work. Talked about LARP, an LARP game called Toontown, and alternate ways to use meditation and visualization to help us manifest our projects and desires and help keep our mental health in balance. And he talked about this queer-identified congregation that he attends to in New York, and we have very many interesting topics in this conversation. We enjoyed very much. I hope you enjoyed too, and let's get weird with Richard Ruane. Hi Richard, welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People. It's so good to have you here. How have you been, my friend?
It's been really fantastic. I think I haven't seen you in almost 6 months, which is, since the previous time I'd seen you had been years. Yeah, it's really fantastic to get a chance to be on. And I remember you talking about how excited you were for this idea. And so it's
Yeah.
great to see like how many episodes are you in now?
Well, released we have 30, 34, I think now.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying. I'm excited about it. It's kind of a therapy for me too. So I get to hang out with creative people 2 times a week. So I'm cranking this up and talking to people and getting to know more people. And initially I thought it would drive me off my work, my creative work of writing but it is actually kind of fooling me because I have this. I get excited. I talk to people and sometimes have an idea or revelation, and I go work on that. So it's been great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. How weird was the last 6 months since we've talked about it's.
Oh my gosh. Nothing about the 2020s has been normal.
Yeah.
Everything about the 2020s has been. So I fought off COVID again, and then did a really busy convention season, which was really fantastic. I think one of the things that I missed during lockdown, because we were essentially in New York, we were essentially for the most part locked down more or less for 3 years, like really seriously for a year and a half, and then a little slightly less for a year. And one of the things I'd really missed was just conventions. I love being around other gamers, and so having a really busy convention season was fantastic. But it was also weird and exhausting, just because it's just you're just constantly traveling and you're around other people all the time. But I got to do 6 conventions in 6 months last winter, which was fun.
Nice.
I had a blast. And so I'm really looking forward to a lot of conventions this year, but hopefully a little more spaced out. Hopefully a little more spaced out. I did get tickets to Necronomicon in Rhode Island, so I will be at the Weird Horror Convention. this
Nice.
year
Well,
just for fun. Um,
yeah,
it's the
going
first
for
time
fun
I've
is
gotten
great.
yeah, it's the first time I've gotten to go to conventions for fun uh, in a long time because we had no conventions for a while, and then once we started back, I was kind of in pro mode. I'm not, pro is a loose term in gaming, but I was back in like just show stuff and demo stuff and all that other stuff. So I'm really looking forward to getting back and doing conventions just to like doing them,
Yeah.
which I'd really missed. But so that's been sort of my last 6 months, and I'm picking up working with my friend John Harness on some weekly sprinting times, which has been really good for my productivity and so that's at least there was at least one day a month where I get a good chunk of stuff written, um, or at
And
least one day
weekly
a week.
writing times? What's that you do?
So writing sprints have been really fantastic for me. I sort of grew up, even got an English degree, focusing in rhetoric, and was always taught like, yeah, if you really want to be serious about writing, you really got to sit down for these long chunks of time. Um, and this year, from John and from other people, just discovering that really a lot of writers get a lot of benefit out of short, intense writing sprints, and I'm one of those writers. So you sit down for X amount of time. We usually go for 25 minutes, um, and then take a 5 minute break, and then just that 25 minutes is really intense writing. But for those of us with neurodivergent brains, it's really helpful to go like, there's a break coming up in 5 minutes. You don't need to look something up right now. You don't need to check
Yeah.
Twitter right now. You don't need to check Facebook right now. There's a break coming up in 25 minutes, and you're gonna be on that just right. Uh, so anything I look up because it's related to what I'm writing. Uh,
And how do you do those one of those 25 sprints a day? How many do you usually do? And how many
Usually,
can you usually
yeah, one of the fun things
accomplish
about
in one of those
sprints is they're
times?
really easy to do with a friend or a group of friends. We're going to experiment with them in a Brooklyn and Queens game design meetup that I'm in. Um, because it's really you're not just sitting down, you're not just co-working with somebody else for an indefinite period of time until you both get distracted. You're sitting down, uh you're turning things off for 25 minutes, so you're not going to do social media and you're not going to do any research not related to your project, and you check in on what you were planning to, what you were working on, what you planned to do, what you ended up working on for those 25 minutes at the end. And it's a really good practice just to talk in productivity or creativity terms about what you're writing without, uh, and also, it gives space to other people to also hear what they're doing. Um,
Yeah.
so they work really well for a slightly structured sort of co-working experience. John and I do them once a week. And that's like, so even if I don't get any other writing in that week, I always get at least 2 sprints in while working with
Nice.
John.
Yeah. So
Uh,
once a week you do two of those. So about
yeah,
an hour of this
yeah.
writing spree with 25 writing, 5 break, 25 writing,
And break
5
is
break.
fairly loose because I think checking in is one of the more valuable things. So I'm willing to take a longer break if it means we get, so that we get to have a conversation
Yeah.
around checking in,
Yeah. Makes
and
sense.
still like getting up and getting a cup of coffee or getting a glass of water or whatever you need to do. And they're really easy to do in a cafe. You can really easily do them digitally.
Yeah.
They've sprints have been really, really helpful for me. And that's like, they sound a little bit like a workplace management term. And so like, but, I know Mur Lafferty, who is a big podcast host and science fiction writer, runs some sprinting, some sort of like collective sprinting and check-in workshops at
Yeah, it
conventions she
sounds
goes
cool.
to, and for the Nebula conference online. Um,
Let's do one next Gen Con or something.
yeah, we should definitely like pre-Gen Con, because post-Gen Con is always so lethargic. I feel like
Oh
a
yeah.
sprint would feel really good.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're just sort of like watching the convention hall come apart at the seams,
Yeah.
and it all gets taken down, and it's all kind of bummer. It's called kind of a bummer. Um, So next time you're at Gen Con, or if you get up to PAX Unplugged next, it's sometime soon, we should definitely sit
Yeah,
down and just do a sprint. Yeah.
it sounds really cool. But I'm thinking about trying to do something here with friends. You talked about maybe doing that online, but I mean, like hanging out
Yeah.
on Discord or something. But
Yeah.
that would be really easy to be distracted, right? Because you open a window, there's yeah. So
Yeah. So I
yeah.
always write online. I always write in Markdown. Um,
Oh.
so occasionally, like it does help because and I also I love my research. I joke with other people that I sometimes like I pick projects based on how much research I get to do. Um, so I don't try to prevent myself from looking things up if I need to check something. Um, but I try to like not have like make sure that we're shutting down all social media. In other words, and also it helps to really have that, even when it's online, it helps to have that accountability person there.
Yeah.
Which sounds weird, but like it's really nice to have one person
No,
who
it,
you're just
it
gonna like
is
say
it is
something
cool.
to. Yeah,
And there's a bunch of creatives stories of creative people that had like a small group of like-minded
yeah,
people, like pen pals, even Robert Howard, Lovecraft, and Clark Catron Smith, the correspondence. uh, there's a lot of artists that has this group of
mhm,
their confidence, or like their
yeah,
yeah, comrades in crime or something,
yeah.
or
And I feel
something
like
like this,
the
right?
my visual arts friends and my illustrator friends get a lot of this from having a shared studio space.
Yeah,
So they benefit a lot from not having private studios where they have a studio with somebody else because they can just, even if they're not doing sprints formally or something like that, they can still like sit down and do work with people who understand sort of that part of your brain and what you're doing and can talk about it with you. And so it's
yeah,
really good, feel like, to have sort of a writing focused meetup.
that's a great
So you
idea.
can,
Yeah,
yeah. Whether online, in person, and sprints work really, really well there. Um, because the other thing is like you get the reward at the end of it is just talking about what happened. Uh,
yeah.
Getting to talk to
And we
another
love
human
talking
about
about this. Yeah, we
yeah,
love talking
yeah,
about our work. I would assume I do. So yeah.
yeah, definitely. Um, and that just feels really, really, even if you didn't get much done, even if you're frustrated, it feels really good to just be able to talk about, I didn't get much done,
Yeah,
and I ended up checking, my messages, or I got a work email and that disrupted everything. And like being able to say those words out loud is really fantastic. So
yeah,
I really recommend sprinting, and sprinting with groups has been a huge change, or sprinting with friends and or groups has been a huge change to how I worked this year. Sharing Biswas and I got together a few months ago to do kind of a shared sprinting time where we got to do just a couple of focused hours in person. Um, and booked out a conference room at a co-working space and just kind of sat for a few hours and got some stuff done there. Um, and it's like anything, it's not going to be for everybody. Writing is not a magic spell that you just pop in, and
yeah.
it's more like a DCC magic spell.
Yeah, but
You're
it
never
is a
really.
practice. It might not work initially, but if you keep
Yeah.
at it, and it might work for you. And
Mhm.
and it's not only a practice for productivity. It's a way to combine something that we love and connecting with other people and other
Definitely.
creatives. And I think that's is like the big part of this.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this podcast. Like yeah, it's a podcast, and like we're producing content that people consume, but it's about hanging out and exchanging ideas and having this and
Mhm.
learning things. Like I just you just taught me something, writing sprints. I never heard about this, and I'm excited to try them out. So yeah,
Yeah, they
thank
were
you.
they were I feel like I'm now like the salesperson for sprint based writing because it really was such a breakthrough for me. Uh,
Yeah,
coming into it out of a period I'd been really productive and wasn't really sure how to focus next, and having at least one day a week that I know I'm going to meet with somebody and I'm going to be doing sprinting has been really fantastic. So
yeah. Thanks for sharing this, and thanks John
yeah,
for sharing this with you.
yeah, yeah.
But Richard, For all the weirdos, the wonderful weirdos out there that might not know who you are, but I also love to ask the guests at home here to say who they are, what they do, and if they can share a small weird detail about themselves in their own words.
I am Richard Ruane. I am the creator of a few different games now, and I think when Diogo and I first started about talking, I said like, "Oh, I'm not a systems person. I'm more of a setting person," and then I went on to write a bunch of different systems.
Yeah,
Um, so I am the creator of Roseville Beach, Moonlight and Roseville Beach, and the subsequent zine series that's coming out this year, and then we have a mystery series for that game that's coming out this year. So that's sort of my chance to experiment with being sort of a publisher and not just a writer. I'm getting to work with Argentinian writer Ezecour on that zine series, and it's kind of work on expanding some stuff there, and some work from Sharang Biswas there too coming out this year. Sherwood is a game that I am a huge like any chance I get to run Sherwood is a traveler based game, but it is about Robin Hood. It is not set in space. There are no spaceships, but it really sort of embraces a lot of what I love about Traveler, including life paths and the really simple, focused one target rolling system that Traveler introduced. Um, and My Chivalric Bromance, which just came out from Exalted Funeral last year and has been selling really nicely, especially now that it's available to shops and conventions. And Barrow Keep, which was my first big setting book out, and is we're working right now on some sort of standalone Barrow Keep projects that don't rely that will be sort of like just kind of pick up and play packs without needing some external game to tie them to.
nice. Yeah,
Um, so those are the ones I've done last. Barra Keep and an earlier game, Dark Descents and Verdigris, were nominated for Best Setting at the IGDN Groundbreaker Awards. Roseville Beach got an honorable mention from the Groundbreakers, and then got an award from the awards, which was originally founded by our friend Joe DeSimone, and then got a Judge's Choice Any this year. So. Um,
nice.
and then one weird thing about me, there are so many weird things about me. Um, as is a I think the weirdest thing about me is I think something we already kind of touched on is everything I stick with as a project involves an absurd amount of research, not because you really have to do research to do it, but that's part of what gets me so excited for projects is being able to give myself a lot of homework, a lot of movies to watch, a lot of books to read, a lot of history to work on, um, a little bit of topography and archaeology and architecture, um, and I think that's giving myself homework is, I think, one of the things that gets me most excited for a project. So I always way too much. Unlike when I was in school and did as little as I could get away with, when I'm started picking my own projects. I love to get kind of lost in the research for a few days. That's sort of my reward. That's my reward to myself for picking up a project. So.
Yeah, and what comes first, like the interesting in get to research a specific subject, or a game idea, and then you look into what you can research about it. Or
I feel like,
my question
yeah,
is kind of what comes first, like search or research? You're
yeah,
always
yeah. I feel
searching
like
or not?
I always start with. I always hate to say always because sometimes it shifts around a little bit.
Yeah,
I always start with setting. Setting is always the thing I start my touchstone, um, and setting is just sort of where I feel most comfortable starting something. Who are people here, and what are they doing, and what's the problem they're facing? Um, and I feel like you could probably say that almost everything I do sort of uh, has a kind of a town with a problem issue, or a town with a problem thing going on, which is, um, it's always a space that's having a problem, and who is it going to fall on uh, who's going to bear the brunt of this problem, or fixing the problem, dealing with the problem, postponing the problem. Uh, and so I feel like, the first thing in Moonlight and Roseville Beach was Roseville Beach, the town of Roseville Beach. Really, the first thing was the title. And then I started thinking, well, Roseville Beach is a nice little town name. Um, so I started working on, what it was. Initially, it was just like a little 16-page booklet for Dark Streets and Darker Secrets, or
Yeah.
for whatever investigation game people wanted to use it with. Um, but I think when I do that, I start thinking about, like, well, who are the PCs and where are they here? Because I always like to start with the notion that the PCs are carefully tied to the setting, even if they're not from there. Like, the PCs are implicated in the setting in some way. They're involved. They're part of the problem and part of the solution of the setting. They're not just kind of wandering through. Um, uh, so as much as I love Scenic Dunsmouth, a Zarchov OSR module, um, I I I'm like, well, what if the PCs were from Dunsmouth? I never do that when I'm running Scenic Dunsmouth, because the way Zarchov wrote it is perfect. Um,
Mhm.
it's even way, as weird as that town is. It's way more fun to, like, dump people into it. Um, but I always want to see, like, when I write a setting, I always want to see, like, how, who are you and why are you here? Uh, what does why you're here say about you? And so that's very much the thing with, um, and from there I sort of spin out, like, character creation system. Like, well, character creation system creates a character sheet, and what system are you going to use to do things with the stuff that we've gotten written down on the character sheet. So I guess that's a little bit my process. um,
Mhm.
and there's mechanics I tend to fall back on. I really love the late period traveler, 2d6 get an 8. um, I am fond of one move PBTA, which is, very
Yeah.
similar to the period traveler. I not always I don't love every Forge in the Dark game, but I really do love the basic Forge in the Dark. Like, roll a die and try to get a 6. I really love the quasi similar other kind dice system, where, different things about what you're doing are more difficult, so you're going to place a lot of them. That I used in Roseville Beach. It was invented by Vincent Baker in an unpublished game called Other Kind, and then perfected and made just a work of art in Meg Baker's game, um, Cyrun. Uh, and But that's what I ended up using for Roseville Beach. So that's sort of, I feel like I always end up starting with a setting. Starting with a setting is sort of where I get my research from. Like, making the setting real is the most important question for me. Um, because because for me, all system starts with character creation and who the PC is. Um, and so for me, I need to find out, like, okay, so who are these people? What are they coming from? Where are they emerging from? What are they doing? Um, so there
Yeah.
ends up being a ton of just, like, digging around, and enjoying digging around, looking up absurd, weird little details. Um, and one I've never gotten the answer to is when did gay bars start having, one that I started with Roseville Beaches. When did gay bars start having flashlight parties? Uh, uh, which was a thing for a while, but I never was able to sort of pin down. Uh, when did you first get this thing where there were the little push flashlights, and you would walk in and all the lights would be out in the club, and you would just be handed a flashlight to sort of navigate around. Uh, when did that start? When did all these other things start? There's all kinds of questions I have to sort of, like, guess at, but, like, I like to make that as informed and interesting as possible. Um,
Yeah.
so I always start with character. I always move from setting to character creation, and then sort of let everything kind of unfold from there.
Yeah. And you seem because of that, because of the research, someone a curious person? Do you consider yourself, curious? Are you do you do this kind of research and get into subjects, doing like deep dives on things outside of role playing games, or that's exclusively for the things you're creating?
Um, I feel like that's almost ends up being sort of like I feel like working on RPGs has in so many ways ended up being a chance to sort of channel sort of like I'm a very curious person, but like so often without a thing that I am working on, my brain can't focus. Like I could be curious about one thing, but I will, it will quickly become consumed or subsumed by being curious about 25 other things. And so the art, like working on writing projects and getting homework from them, is part of what sort of like settles my executive function challenge brain down to like focus on finding out about like some specific questions. Um, where like otherwise like it would be like, oh, I want to find out more about noir films and their relationship to comics, and then 5 minutes later my brain is on to something else. It's discovered another thing it's curious about. um
Yeah.
and so it's been really fantastic to get to have an option to see it get an option to like, just sit down and work on a thing because I some part of me needs this information. um
Yeah.
and then sort of like let my brain sort of like use that as sort of as a thing to sort of prioritize things with. So like I'm very curious, but like I until I get a project, the curiosity is too free floating and too frequently interrupted. um like
Hmm.
writing my master's thesis was an awful experience where I just constantly just like, oh, but over here, but wait, what over here? um so really getting a chance to sort of dig in and see lots and lots of information and sort of process it out, like giving myself research projects is what allows me to sort of pursue that curiosity in a constructive, useful way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And then like uh, as if the project was a lighthouse in a foggy ocean, so you can try to
yes, yeah,
navigate this
yeah,
curiosity and helps you guide you. Yeah,
yeah.
excellent. And Richard, I always ask everyone here about the weird, and it's one of the topics of the show. So,
Mhm.
how would you define weird for yourself, and how do you pursue it in your work and in life in general?
I think right now, I think of the weird as a conflict in. I think the thing that is compelling to me about things I label weird, I think, is a tension or conflict in the narrative patterns that kind of feed into something, or the sources that sort of feed into something. Um, so the weird is a little bit like two bodies of water meeting and forming like a deep pool or a rapids, or something like, or of a high volume of water suddenly going over a shallow area and forming a rapid, um, or two bodies of water kind of forming to meet a deep pool. Um, and the weird sort of comes out of that conflict of sources, and I really like what Ken and Robin talk about stuff, do live shows. They do the geek troping of historical events, and I really love to see what if X thing that existed, and then another thing that sort of like didn't exist but is a geek trope. um, and I think that creates a lot of really cool, powerful ideas. um, and it also creates cool things for game players to do, because there is not a pre-scripted, preset thing. There's not a pattern to easily fall into, because the strange thing has disrupted the known pattern. So you've got to sort out new patterns. Um, and I feel like for a long time, RPGs themselves were sort of a disrupted weird force. Like, you enter a story or you enter a piece of fiction, but now everybody has free will. And so nobody knows what the plot is about or what the beat structure is. Um, because it's, the plot is not the external events that happen to the characters. The plot is how the characters change in response to the external events. Um, and so I feel like the RPGs themselves tend to make things weird because you're entering a piece of fiction, and so much of fiction is about watching satisfying patterns unfold. Like even fiction I like, there's a certain, I'm a big fan of both romance novels and mysteries and crime novels, and all of those have really established patterns. Um,
Yeah.
but all of a sudden in an RPG, those patterns get disrupted because everybody has free will. Everybody in the scenario has free will, and they can respond to things with their own understanding of what needs to happen next, and their own analysis of what needs to happen next, and their own emotional response to what needs to happen next, or just because they want to. And they may be thinking at both a meta level, and they may be thinking in character. They may be thinking purely vicariously.
Yeah,
Um,
or they maybe even just want to disrupt the pattern because they want to see what will
yeah,
happen
what
if they
happens? What
disrupt the
happens if
pattern.
I
Yeah.
like? Yeah, what happens if I
What
release?
happens if you don't save the princess for the dragon? What happens if
Right. Yeah. What
the
happens if we
dragon
Yeah, what
is the
happens if
prisoner
we
of the
say like,
princess? Yeah.
"Hey, this sounds like the princess's family's problem and not my problem." What happens if you keep wandering over that hill? Or in a mystery game, what happens if you decide that the person who hired you is really the bad guy, or is just as bad as everybody else that you're supposedly fighting against? Um, and or what happens if you decide that your interpersonal relationships, but you're going along and you're pursuing Mask of Nyarlathotep in Call of Cthulhu, or you're using some other system to do Mask of Nyarlathotep, and you decide that your interpersonal relationships between the characters are more important than actually where you end up and what sequence you unveil the clues, and those are all your decision. Um,
Yeah.
I had a really blast had a huge blast playing Trail of Cthulhu uh, in a campaign with my friend Kat, and I was the new player in the group, and everybody else had new characters, but they were, they knew in character how the investigations we were doing in that campaign tied to other campaigns that they had previously played, and I was the new player in this group, and it was really a lot of fun to just kind of create this character who did not fit with their other characters, and just be the guy who's like, I'm literally your hired gun. Like I
Yeah.
like also I know knowing too much about this stuff. I've watched what it did to you. I've watched what it did to your parents. Don't tell me. Don't explain things to me. Just put a gun in my hand, or give me a thing to translate, or put a problem in front of me and let me do it. And it was a blast to play that, because it's a character we frequently don't see in cosmic horror. Yeah, usually everybody is like enthralled by the mystery, and my character was just like, you guys are my friends, and I'm going to solve this problem because it's affecting your lives, or I'm going to be part of solving this problem because it's affecting your lives, not because I must know uh,
Yeah.
what the forces are. Um, and
This
so
unquenchable
we had an absolute
curiosity.
blast playing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was set in the 60s. Kat did a great job. But that's what I think of when our even investigation scenarios become weirded, because the characters get to decide where, no, actually, we're not going to figure out who did it, or we're not going to figure out why they did it. We're going to go focus on this other thing over here. Um,
Yeah.
and
It's
that's where the weird comes from to me in RPGs, is that like place where like, um, all our source fiction, all the things that we're reading and trying to get inspired by, encounter radical free will of gameplay.
yeah. And I love, one of the things about this liberty and making choices, and every time you play is different. And I love that phrase from Mothership that you have survive, solve, or save, and
Right.
you have to pick one. Like you won't be
Yeah.
able to do everything, and that's fantastic. Like
Yeah.
that's the
It's free
weird
will, but you're also up against time and physics and space and all the other things that limit
yeah,
our free will. And so like, hey, so how do I prioritize things
yeah,
in this instance? And it may not be what a novelist would do. And to me, that's the fascinating thing. What do you do when you're not doing what a novelist would do, or what a movie director would do,
yeah,
or a scriptwriter would do? Um,
yeah.
so
But
coming
I
from
think
those
that
places, yeah, go ahead.
that's kind of being restored too, right? Because
Mhm.
during a period in our hobby, we're really, because we're it's a new hobby, we're exploring its origins, its components, and I think during the 90s it was really about, had this idea that the game master was there to tell a story, and the
Yeah,
modules and adventures were really set up in this way to have this pattern to follow. Sometimes it didn't matter much what characters would do, like the beginning and the end of the adventure would be the same.
yeah,
And yeah, and I know that that's a valid way to explore the media. I think it doesn't, make use of the whole potential of role playing games to be this kind of exploring all the
right.
possibilities, and playing the story. The story is not there. Like the story is just something that will come up during play,
Mhm.
and it's my favorite part of the game for sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because the external events are part of what makes a story, um, but really, urban fantasy and paranormal romance are. Yeah, I think we've had this conversation where those two genres, and horror. Frequently, you have the same set of external events in a horror novel, an urban fantasy novel, and a paranormal romance. But what the characters do in and around those events is radically different. And in so many ways, an RPG um, is about tossing characters into external events and letting them sort of make their own decisions about what kind of story, or they can be like there's lots of different RPGs. They do lots of different things. Um,
Yeah,
uh, but that's the part that excites me is in so many ways, um, you're sort of navigating what kind of narrative is going to come up by making decisions in the moment and then figuring out sort of where you went, where you ended up.
yeah,
um,
yeah.
and
It's
yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I think that's a perfect way to put in. And I was just thinking about how you described your process of doing the research and coming up with the idea and working on it. Uh, and then I thought about, do you have any ritual about working, a creative ritual for when you start working for product and you sit down to write? You mentioned this the sprint writing, uh,
Mhm.
but do you, when you do that at home or even there, do you have any ritual, like an invocation of the muse, some like the hat to wear or anything like this?
One of the things that's important to me, that friends who sprint with me sort of tease me about, is I have to, before I press start on the timer, I have to get everything that I know I'm going to need to reference open. So if I need to reference a Wikipedia article, I need to get that article open. If I'm looking at one of your games or somebody else's games or something like else like that, I'm getting that open. Um, so I want to make sure that I spend as little time of the sprint as possible uh, doing, referencing information and reading is not bad during a sprint. I try not to spend time doing Google searches or searching for the right file um, during a sprint. So I always have, there's that's sort of the point of doing it. But that's one of the things that I feel like kind of puts me in the mode is to get all the right documents open. So all my past notes are open. Any books I'm referencing are open, whether physical or digital. Any websites I need to reference are
Yeah,
open. If I need to do a Google search for something, I've done the Google search and I've opened the pages. Um,
That reminds me of that cooking technique of before start cooking, have all the ingredients there ready
yeah,
on their, I forgot the name of the technique, but it's got a mise en table or something like this. That's
yeah,
having
yeah,
everything ready to go. So yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's a great
definitely.
strategy. Yeah. I even
This
heard
is
some books saying that if you want to write in the morning, just when you go to sleep, you just set up the table to write in the morning with everything you want to use right there, so
right,
you can wake up and just immediately get sit down and do what you have to do. Yeah,
right, yeah, yeah. So that's yeah, that's kind of my like sitting down to write ritual is getting everything I need that I know I need open. And inevitably I'll think of something else I need, like, halfway through, but then I can sort of negotiate, especially with a sprinting strategy, I can negotiate, can this wait another 10 minutes? Can I keep going without this thing open for 10 minutes? And then
yeah,
during the next break, I can get all that stuff open. Or I can like stretch the breakout to get stuff open and go in later. Um, because to me, I know that those spots are where I get distracted, and where other things start to sort of bleed into the process.
yeah,
And so if I have everything open, and especially if I'm with somebody else, so I'm like, me getting everything open is like a thing that they are waiting on. Um, that is tends to be such an effective strategy for me, um, because then I can really look and see, like, okay, I have the things I need open. If it's not open, I can probably make it for at least one sprint without this thing ready. Um, and if I start looking for something during that kind of initial time or setup time or break time, I know that, oh, other person can't start till I start, so I need to like focus. And knowing that does an amazing job of just getting my brain to pay attention to what it's doing, um, and sort of and get all that sort of like chaotic cloud that is sort of
yeah,
my brain sort of focused on a thing.
yeah. I was even imagine like having this. Uh, Wanting to open something but not opening and having to think about, oh, I will open when this is over, when this is over. That's probably gonna
Oh
drop
yeah, yeah, yeah,
get carry me away from what I'm trying to do. So yeah,
yeah.
I understand having wanting to have everything there and minimize distractions to the most, because I sense myself getting distracted a lot. So
Mhm.
I kind of work like that too. I work like half an hour and then go do something, and then when I'm ready again, I go get back, put another half an hour, and then go
Yeah,
something, because yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
hard to stay on the same thing for really long periods of time unless it's like the deadline. I have to bunker down and finish this or something.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do
But yeah,
you?
yeah, I found that ritual really helps me kind of prioritize.
Yeah. Do you do you think you can, we talk about a lot about inspirations and artists and things that inspires us, and I'm always I am well aware from where I draw most of my ideas. I mean, uh, as artists, we of course are always tuned to, we're researching new things, learning new things, you're always drawing this into our creations. But I
Uh-huh.
do draw a lot from my childhood, from the media from my childhood, whether
Uh-huh.
comics, movies, and cartoons. uh, can you identify any place or any area or any period from where you see yourself drawing a lot from your work on your art?
I am not a historian by training. Uh, my scholarly background is in communication studies and education. Um, but I get a lot out of doing work in history, reading, uh, where if I can get a hold of them, primary text. If I can't, good secondary sources that include a lot of the primary text. Um, Sherwood, especially, just was very much informed and nourished as a project by uh, by linear notes on the four oldest Robin Hood ballads, more so even than sort of the Victorian retellings or the 17th century retellings of those ballads, from people like Thomas Algren. And then I get really excited to do good work with history and literary history. I find myself constantly going back to novels as my point of inspiration. A lot of the stuff that I'm doing right now with horror, whether horror comedy like Haunting of Cliff Cove, or more straight up horror like some other projects I have coming out, or that are not read, or not at the announcement stage yet, is been very, very influenced by the sort of divergence in horror writing that Stephen King and a few others represented in the 70s. That was still sort of like tackling the entities of cosmic horror, but doing it in a much more human centric, relationship oriented way. I've told people I think of kind of that period of horror, or at least my favorite novels from that period of horror. I shouldn't even say the best works. My favorite novels from that period of horror are less psychological and more sociological. Both consequences and stakes, and the things that people are excited about are their relationships and their communities, even when they don't like their community, or even if they live in conflict with their community. Their relationships with the community is super important, and I feel like that's something that would have enriched if I'd made that connection earlier. It probably would have enriched the first draft of or the initial book of Roseville Beach. But right now it's coming back and initially, as I work on Dim All the Lights, the second Roseville Beach book. It's very much informing how I think both narratively and setting wise, and both and also mechanics is like that sort of sociological sense of horror, where the drama and emotional intensity comes from those relationships. That's and also looking at sort of like where you kind of like do the chasing things back. Who inspired Stephen King, who inspired other people who were writing horror at the same time. It's really exciting to sort of know about that moment in the history of publishing horror, where it was really hard from a fandom level to distinguish between horror, suspense, and thriller. We think of those as fairly distinct genres now, but all of the big writers who of the 70s or late 60s would periodically push their descriptions or their genre identifiers into the other. Like Stephen King would describe, I think Ira Levin is writing thrillers, who wrote Rosemary's Baby, which is a really fantastic, like obviously a fantastic movie, but also a really fantastic book. And so thinking, kind of using that as a touchstone to sort of like, not a touchstone, but like as a point of departure for like looking back and sort of going back and rediscovering Patricia Highsmith, who was during the 60s one of the biggest thriller writers, and sort of perfected the crime novel in so many ways. And then we sort of forgot about Pat Highsmith for a while, but her work, and you can even start to see her work start to inform a lot of decisions that other horror writers, thriller writers started to make, both in plot and elements of plot, and start to see connections there and think of new things. And then also looking for what was odd and unpopular. And I'm going to use horror as or what was odd and less popular, or less likely to be remembered in horror. In America, we had the slasher genre sort of come to prominence in horror at the end of the 70s. And a lot of times when you talk to people, they'll talk about not liking horror, but what they generally mean is they don't like the slasher, which, I'm not judging. I love slashers. I have I can only watch so many of them because they genuinely scare me, usually. Uh, but there's all these other things going on in horror that are either less popular at the time, less popular in cultural memory, whichever it is. And I think going back and looking at those things that were coming out sort of tell you a lot about the period you're in. Looking
Yeah.
at the weird queer subtext that started to emerge from Hammer horror films um, in the 70s, and all the very kind of carnivalesque approach to horror, where just over the top costumes and lots of hints of sex, lots of hints of slasher levels of gore, but never really getting there. It was always the really bad sort of like red icing blood, uh,
Mhm.
that was way too red. Um, that was also popular in giallo. Um, and that's it's sort of like chasing back those kind of oddball connections in fiction in movies.
Yeah.
And then I find myself post Barrow Keep constantly going back to work on historical projects because I just find reading history to be kind of exciting. Um, now that I have projects that I actually get to kind of drive my interest in history and kind of keep me focused, whether I'm not wandering off from biography to biography,
Yeah.
or bopping around from like random book to random book.
Yeah, that's great. And having a way to channel all this interest in making something uh, that's something that you really love, you're really passionate about, and make it gameable, and present this to people that sometimes wouldn't have contact with this context otherwise, right? It's
Right. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
great
All my
great
friends
work.
had to
Yeah.
hear about my great discovery that about had to hear way too much about like early Robin Hood ballads and how they were different from 19th century Robin Hood stories, that to the point that they wanted to, I think they were just like, "Oh my gosh, have another drink, please." Uh but yeah, no,
Can
that has been an absolute freaking blast. It has kept me kind of going and productive for the last few years, is having somewhere to sort of channel like all the questions, and
yeah,
and kind of put them into projects.
yeah. It's a great way to focus your curiosity for sure.
Yeah.
Richard, one thing I would like to ask too is, you know, you talked about the inspirations from what you draw from your work, and but I'm also curious about if you have any, creator, artist, writer, or designer from who you inspired by because the way they do their work or the way they approach the
Mhm.
media they work on, or the way they position themselves in that art world in general. Do you have anything like this for you, or?
I think I come back to like being a much younger gamer, and picking up really fascinating setting books, and some of those include like as random different as different and random as they might seem, like the Ravenloft setting books, or um the the Chicago by Night setting book for Vampire the Masquerade, um and some of those late 80s early 90s sort of like setting books that just got me so excited. And I think that that's one thing that sort of I get constantly fascinated by, excited by, is is what does it look like to do what I wanted to do with those setting books as a young gamer, which was not go by the core rules. I had no interest in playing AD&D second edition because I had already like despaired of finding anybody to play BXD&D, uh,
Mhm.
and AD&D was just too prescriptive and too crunchy, and D&D seemed to have like this really cool notion of what how a fantasy campaign could unfold. Um, So I was not interested in picking back up AD&D second edition, but I really, really loved all the setting books coming out from AD&D. And how do you just stop tying those to a rule book, and sort of how do you just pick up by Chicago by Night and start playing Chicago by Night without having to like go back and read a 400-page Vampire the Masquerade, first edition book. Oh, or it may have only been 300 pages. Don't at me. With the page count of Vampire the Masquerade first edition. Uh, so and then so like coming forward in time, you know the work of Zarchov on stuff like Scenic Dunsmouth or uh, the Price of Evil. Um, some of those beautifully done, powerfully evocative micro setting stuff, like one village, one haunted house, and seeing everything that just could unfold from that one village or the one haunted house. Um, has been such a huge influence on me. I think specifically, I'm still deeply, deeply influenced by Apocalypse World and Cyrun to sort of like breakout games by both Vincent Baker and Meg Baker in the original case, and by Meg Baker uh, and some others in the second case. Um, just because of their very deep focus on a specific thing, but also the very powerful sense of an open world. You're going to do things, and there's going to be consequences for those things, but you've got to decide what is your narrative as a character, really, really about. Um, and both of those have early fast rolling, a lot of things that I sometimes steer away from when I'm running other games, but both of those sort of like get to rolling really fast. um, and both of those are beautiful examples of Vincent talks about going to Gen Con in the late aughts. I think maybe it was 2008 or something like that, and playing in a game of BXD&D, and about an hour in just realizing that like no one has a plan for what's going to happen. There's no plot. There's no like thing that's like that we're moving towards, that we have to do. There's not a master plan back here. That we have this open set of options, and that deeply influencing the way he wrote Apocalypse World. And I think that also becomes very true of Meg's Cyrun, or Meg's work on Cyrun as well. Um, so those both have huge influence on me. Um, Jared Sinclair's "So You Want to Be an Adventurer" slash What's So Cool About Outer Space. Your work on that initial set of games you did, still sort of like, I love Primal Quest. It's not it's I'm still blown away though by the way you connected, both mechanically, thematically, monster wise, uh, monster hunting, sort of urban fantasy slash horror, uh, and swords and sorcery, and sort of high action space adventure, has been just a huge influence on how I think about system, and decisions I make on kind of getting back to system. So I think, um, those are just a few of the creators I keep going back to, uh, most, just in the last few years. Um, and I, and
Yeah.
there's lots of other things. I really
The,
love the Gumshoe system, because I think it did something kind of fun and different with mysteries, where it's just like just stop rolling,
yeah,
uh,
indeed.
for key information, which I feel like a lot of minimalist OSR creators were just like, we don't even need points. Um, we can just
True.
start answering questions,
Yeah, yeah.
and being truthful with the answers. Um, so that's I think that's sort of kind of where I've been going my inspirations recently.
Hello Weirdos, this is Diogo Nogueira and I'm back with a word from our sponsors. Me! I just released a new game called Cosmosaurus, in which you play a dinosaur space ranger who protects the galaxy from evil threats such as slime bankers, undead pirates, and Cosmosaurus from a void dimension. It's a game with a runes-light system inspired by Forged in the Dark and Lasers and Feelings. It comes with a bunch of tables for you to generate content for it. If you know my games, they're really easy to play and they have tools to help you improvise and play with low prep. It's an ideal game for one-shots, short campaigns, and introducing new people to the hobby, and it's a really perfect family game. I play with my kids all the time. It's a game inspired by Saturday morning cartoons. It's really well illustrated by Lucas Kowalski from Poland, and with a great layout by Guilherme Gontijo. It's a really fun game. You should check it out on DriveThruRPG, itch.io, or exclusively in print on exaltedfurniture.com. I have many other games there, check them out. All the links are in the show notes, so click there. And let's get back to Weird with our chat.
Yeah, it's honestly, I'm honored to be among the greats. I would say, and really people that really inspires me too. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. And Richard, we were talking a little bit earlier before I start recording about stuff that are working on right now, and we're excited to see coming further in the year. So, what are you working right now, and what would be your favorite weird part of your this project?
So my next thing that's going to come out, and it may not even do any kind of serious crowdfunding before I just release the digital parts of the project, is The Haunting of Cliff Cove. I'm really hoping to get a usable draft of that project out in March. I've got like to hand over my notes, or like a developmental notes, to both Tony, who's going to publish the physical version, and to my development editor. The end of by the end of this month. So it's going to end up being pretty tight and short. It is a Forged in the Dark game, but it doesn't use stats, so it's very, very influenced by City of Mist, which is one I always end up leaving off my list of inspiration. City of Mist, just because I find it very interesting just to think about games without numeric stats in them, and how does that sort of, can you play a quasi or semi crunchy game without numeric stats? And I think City of Mist does a really cool job of kind of making that happen. I'm really, really interested to see what happens when you kind of blend tags with or I've been over the past few years. I did this with my Chivalric Bromance too, but like when you share tags with something based more in Forge in the Dark or Lumen or something like that. So I feel like that's getting mechanically weird. I'm also, as I'm writing some demo mysteries for it, I'm finding myself really, really excited to sort of blend in both psychological thriller giallo and classic supernatural horror giallo to sort of how we do adventures in that, because it's not, the source text is very obviously Scooby-Doo, but what I want is something a little more over the top, a little more lurid, for putting Scooby-Doo characters in something that's a little more mature.
Yeah.
And
Maybe like the Velma cartoon.
Yeah, a little bit like that.
Recently.
Yeah. Or like, Mystery Inc. has been, I think my big touchstone, my point of departure for that. And Castle Rock, the Stephen King inspired series Castle Rock that came out a few years ago. And then this summer is the plan for releasing Spies of Nottingham Castle. Spies of Nottingham Castle is Sherwood, which is already sort of a supernatural fantasy game about outlaws. But Spies of Nottingham Castle is about essentially something that's not really been a major focus or theme of most of the literature, but tends to pop around and show itself a little bit in various pieces and bits of the outlaws in the forest placing spies inside the sheriff's sort of like headquarters, and got to do a really, really rough, very alpha play test of that during Metatopia last year, and got really great feedback, and a lot of really good ideas. But essentially, you are outlaws, but instead of being in the forest, you've got to keep your cover and keep returning to your bed in the castle every night, and making hard decisions, being under lots of pressure because you're just constantly surrounded by people who are your opponents, um, and could actively hurt you, and having to make a lot of decisions there. And then getting to dim all the lights, which is coming back to a little bit of what I talked about before. It's a standalone game book set on Roseville Beach, also in 1979, but it has the full rules of play as well as a short campaign length adventure. Um, so that is sort of what's
Wow,
upcoming. Uh, Hopefully
that's a
this year,
lot
the
stuff.
last
Yeah,
one may get pushed to 2025 just because it's a lot. And then I've got a few
yeah,
other things that are not ready to talk about yet, but right now, doing a lot of reading on early Chaosium Call of Cthulhu adventures just to see sort of how those sort of open-ended nonlinear mysteries sort of things I've played but never GM'd. How do they work?
oh.
Yeah. So
And have you find out anything yet about how do they work? How
yeah, I
or
think it's
your favorite one of those early Call of
yeah, I think the
Cthulhu
one I
open-ended
keep coming
mysteries?
back to is the masterpiece Mask of Nyarlathotep. Is uh, and I've forgotten the name of the initial designer who was not a Lovecraft fan, um, and not a big fan of the mythos, but really wrote a beautiful sort of globe-trotting uh, adventure with specific locations. Made you have a year to finish it, so tracking your time between locations and figuring out how you're going to travel expeditiously, and how you're going to fit that into your budget all feel like really powerful dramatic decisions, where too often in campaigns they just feel like arbitrary things you're keeping track of. um,
Yeah.
like, but how much money
What's the
you
name
have,
of the
where you're
scenario?
spending it. Mask of Nyarlathotep.
Oh, yeah.
uh, uh, and
Yeah.
it's they just make so many things that seem like weird bookkeeping details absolutely urgent, because you have exactly a year to get across, to track down information from these 5 locations to find this person to stop a ritual. You have few leads on where they might be, or on where some of their allies might be, um, and you just have to. And it's the 1930s, so there's no just getting a budget flight from here to here and getting it
Yeah.
done in 5 days. You have modes of travel that are really expensive and take a matter of weeks, or you have modes of travel that are really cheap and sometimes take months, or that take unpredictable amounts of time, um, because they get bogged down in customs, or they have to make a stop, but then they get an embargo while they're at that stop, uh,
Yeah.
because
And it,
somebody was bringing contraband or something.
I don't know if it is like the one they re-released it recently, but it's
Uh-huh.
a gigantic adventure, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is
It's
a real, like,
it's like a full campaign.
even the original version is really, really big, and then they added a lot
Yeah.
more rich detail to it. Uh,
Yeah.
and so everybody I
Yeah.
know who's gotten to play through it has fallen in love with it,
Yeah.
because that big focus on decision making, um,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
how
I'm
relevant
I'm just
all these
af
tidy, all these
yeah.
details are.
I'm just afraid how hard it must be to run this thing, like to read
Yeah, yeah,
everything, and yeah,
yeah.
that's gonna be like a second job. Like I'm running Mask of Nyarlathotep because it's so much stuff, and
Oh,
they
yeah, yeah,
even
yeah.
have like
You can't
props and
do it.
stuff.
You
Yeah,
cannot do this. You can't even do it. I don't even think you can do a good demo as a con game or something like that. You need a group who's
yeah,
going to spend like a significant number of weeks together, a lot of
yeah.
time together. So
It seems amazing though, but
yeah,
one day I want to try that. And I'm looking at it right now on my shelf, and like, yeah, I gotta check that out. That sounds amazing. Yeah.
no,
And talking about these games, we talked about Call of Cthulhu, and I always love to ask you
Mhm.
if you what would be the weirdest game you ever played, or weird game you played recently that made an impression on you and made you see games in a different way.
Uh, so I'm gonna rave about, and I'm not a big LARP person. I do LARP once in a blue moon. Um, and I'm normally in when I talk about games, I'm very big on talking about in fiction stuff. Um, but I recently got to join the New York LARP, a New York LARP group to play Toontown, which they did not. I don't believe they wrote. I could be mistaken on that. I don't think they wrote it. It is a 1930s LARP uh, about the management of an animation studio locking their staff in for the night and make to essentially like replace a rejected feature. Like they're getting locked in to replace a rejected feature, um, and the mechanics are deeply diegetic. To remake this feature, it has to be approved by departments. And it has to go onto the storyboard. Um, but all those are very diegetic sort of mechanics. They could easily translate to a board game sort of environment where you take, I've written this, and now we're going to get um, we're going to take it to the illustrators, and then we're going to take it to paint and paste, and then uh, got to convince our storyboard artist to place it on the storyboard. Um, but
Yeah.
the volume of mixed motives that were intersected, and one of my big fascinations is what happens when you start removing mechanics or minimizing mechanics or keeping mechanics very very diegetic. Uh, and the number of things that just exploded or unfolded. There were people who were, because they had not been paid in forever, were secretly living in the office. Uh, and so there were
Oh.
other people who were not living in the office who kept noticing things move around and got convinced that the office is haunted because things were randomly moving around. Um, and There were people who were like trying to start up other businesses because they hadn't been paid in a while. Um, uh, or side
And that's
businesses.
all improvised, right? It's not like a table
Yeah,
for to roll what's gonna do or anything. Everybody's
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
making this as they go.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's very mechanical LARPs. There's LARPs that have a lot of sort of rich system sort of behind them. Uh, I was blown away at how much Toontown could do with nothing but the diegetic mechanics for how a storyboard comes together, which a little hyper structured but very diegetic. Um, and then just also how much weight was just carried by the fiction. Um, and I got to do that this summer. It was an absolute blast to kind of get reintroduced to LARP that way. LARP is sort of where I cut my teeth on kind of after coming out of high school and being very into D&D. LARP is where I cut my teeth on horror gaming, um, and other sort of more modern styles or more modern fiction styles based gaming before I got into uh, Vampire as a tabletop game or other horror games as a tabletop games. I was very into VLARP, and so getting every couple of years to come back, and it's been even longer because of lockdown, but getting every couple of years to come back and sort of re-meet and reintroduce LARPs and see all the really cool stuff that the LARP space is doing, um, especially
Yeah.
with just things that feel super diegetic and super embedded into the world of the fiction. Um,
Yeah,
just
it sounds
blew
very
me away.
unique.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never heard about this. I mean, basically what I knew about LARP was because of vampire
Uh,
and stuff,
yeah.
because LARP based its own tabletop role playing games. And
Right. Right.
and
Right.
I never consider much, LARPs independent from tabletop RPGs until recently, until I knew that people just making ARPs for ARPs,
Yeah.
their own thing. And
Yeah, I think
until
I
now, yeah,
really
looks great.
loved John Peterson's. I think John Peterson's level of detail in like pretty much all his historical books about the history of RPGs. Um, how thin the line between tabletop role playing and LARP
Yeah.
was during early role playing.
Oh yeah.
Things that we would pinpoint as like super strict, beginning in the
Yeah.
80s, like this is over here and this is over here.
Yeah, even
And
D&D, people say, "Oh, D&D came from chainmail and wilderness
yeah,
survival." There was so much more than that.
no, yeah, the
LARP
Bronstein
is
was
part of
was
it. Yeah,
yeah, Bronstein players were up and moving around the room and having private conversations and like then approaching the sort of ref to sort of talk about the results of those private conversations and figure out how to mediate them. Um, Dave Wesley was not sitting around a big table supervising everybody's conversations. They were wandering around the room and they had a space
yeah,
that they could come find him when they had things that they needed to resolve with him. Um, and then just Dave Arneson and how many props he would just bring to play a character in a Bronstein. Uh, and and then some of the early non-wargaming sort of trend of RPGs, which was coming from science fiction societies, where they would do play by mail in character. They would just send each other letters in character all year round, and they would get to certain conventions and they would play like a LARP style version of their character. Um, so that sort of really excited about that period where there wasn't a clear distinction between tabletop and LARP. Um, versus the 80s 90s when it became like, no, this is a LARP thing, this is a tabletop thing.
yeah. And but it is kind of being RPG, as we are like pushing the boundaries of what tabletop is. We're
Yeah.
kind of incorporating, some games are incorporating rituals and things that the
Mhm.
players have to actually do. I do love doing that. I do love, breaking from the rules and say, no, this is something the players have to do, because I think it kind of draws them in, and it makes the game something more than just a game. I don't know,
Yeah.
an experience in a way, right?
Yeah.
Uh, do you have any other hobbies besides role playing games, or
uh,
research stuff?
yeah, yeah. Right now I am starting to branch out into doing some fiction writing. I got to do some fiction writing for Roseville Beach and my chivalric romance. And getting back into fiction writing has been super life-giving for me. And so I'm really looking forward to getting back into it. I don't have anything to like there's not a specific project to tell you about, but just getting
Yeah,
back into it. And much like anything with RPG, much just like doing RPG stuff, you end up discarding or forgetting, you know, 50, 60, 70% of everything you worked on. Because it's just like, all right, I did that and it's over here now. I may come back to it at some point. It may emerge to something else. It just,
yeah,
it just, uh, but I feel like that's true of almost all creative work. Like
yeah. And do you think what you learned by making role playing games helped you in some way to get into fiction writing, and then helped you uh, get a little bit of a head start in that?
um, I guess we'll find out in a sense, but I feel like a lot of strategies I use for sitting, because I think of myself less as a game designer and more of a game writer. So I think a lot of the strategies I
What's the
use,
difference?
I feel like designers feels like I've just got this intense control over everything. Uh, Whereas a writer, I feel like I have control over the text. Like I don't control the way the game
Game
is
designers
performed.
don't exist then,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
no, you can't control.
So I feel like, and part of it is just like people keep moving the design of games into like this like powerful position in relation to everything that gets in like the play of games, and like I'm gonna like tell you how to talk to your table. or I'm going to, tell you how to talk to your GM. And that can be something that provides some really interesting stuff. I am much more curious to see, like, if I hand you a text, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
So I'm much more interested in somebody getting their hands on the text and taking creative control over what they make with it.
Yeah.
Uh,
But I still think that's a designer though, and that's a really good
yeah,
designer because you make something that help them make something too. You know,
yeah,
it's like I talked on other chats here how I love seeing games that are more like Lego sets that
uh,
it has a face you can put it just like the box, like this great spaceship for a sci-fi game, but you can take it apart and do it slightly different, or you can make a speedboat and be a game, almost
uh,
the same. You use the mechanism and make something about sea adventures or something. And I love that about games instead of making this, as you said, a very closed experience. It is valid and everything, but it's different, right? It's different ways to approach the game design, I think.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and when you do that writing, that helps you with the productivity and having this approach to work, right?
Right. Mhm. And I,
Yeah.
and so it's a lot of, I think what's helping me is that kind of general approach to work. Um, it's helped me sort of build characters, to think of who characters are and how they fit into the setting. Um, and that's also a big challenge because, in theory, if I'm creating Barrow Keep or Roseville Beach, like any character I write and put into the setting could be an important supporting character for the narrative that emerges at the table, um,
Hmm.
or the fiction that emerges at the table. Uh, but they'll never be the main character. And at some point, like as a writer, you've got to pinpoint
Yeah, one
an
of them
important
to be.
character or characters, um, and also sort of pull back fascinating detail. I think one thing that has helped me on being sort of a setting designer is I always overwrite my settings and then have to like pull back several hundred or 1,000 words from those settings. Like I've got to like, I've got way too much detail about every NPC in Roseville Beach in my head, or in some early draft of documents.
Yeah.
Uh, like I know what they look like, but I'm just like, we need to like, what is their age? What are their pronouns? What's their general sort of disposition to the world? Like in like a sentence, maybe two, uh, and like tie them to a space, and then let the PCs and the GM for that sort of encounter and flesh out those characters from there. Uh,
Yeah.
and that comes out, those details come out when I run demo games, or when I run Roseville Beach, but they don't show up in the book anymore because they're. But at some point in writing fiction, like those details have to come out; they have to emerge. Um, uh, but they you don't
Yeah.
need one character who's not the main character dominating the narrative, and so it's a it's a fun challenge, but it's also like we use fiction to illustrate role playing games a lot and to excite role playing games a lot, but like they are very different kinds of writing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think RPG has a little bit of fiction because of character creation and
Right.
words
Yeah.
building, but it draws a lot from technical writing too, right?
Mhm.
And game writing. Like we're learning a lot from board games too now. Like
Board
people,
games, video
yeah,
games. We're even learning a lot from LARP. Like I feel like there's a lot of video games present the challenge to a certain extent, but also LARP and minimal games sort of like ask us to like consider like how much of this text do you really need.
yeah, yeah. Like
Uh,
that. What you said you do. Like I'm doing this exactly right now. I'm writing, an adventure for a game, and it's 3,000 words like commission, but I wrote 5,000. So I'm like, well,
Yeah.
what can I cut? Yeah, I'm cutting this. Well, I can rewrite this 3 sentence, paragraph in one or two sentences, and then just
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, cutting with getting the axe and just cutting everything that isn't essential. And I kind of like that very succinct, the way uh sometimes old school essentials those like the very succinct descriptions and bullet
Yeah.
points. It's faster to read for me. I know a lot of people still prefer the old uh paragraph,
Mhm.
the text read, the boxed test. Yeah,
Right.
but
Right. Right.
it's minimalism is the way to go, I think, in some ways, like the essential, because that gives, because when the GM is running the adventure, they won't read all those paragraphs, right? So yeah.
Right. Yeah. 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 I never do as a GM. Like and I'm well aware that a handful of people do always read their box text, but like I go
Yeah.
through, underline the things that I think I can't leave out, and then just sort of uh,
Yeah.
try to have a dialogue with the
Do you
players.
do you mark your books?
Uh, I use a lot of PDFs, so I tend to either
Hmm.
copy from the PDF into a new document, or I just sort of highlight the PDF. So
Yeah. I would like to highlight my books, but I can't for some reason. Like I want to use them more, but it's hard. Like
it is the
I have several copies of DCC, but I have one that I'm writing on, like making
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
observations and stuff. Yeah, but it would be fun to have the not caring so much and do that because I think it would be easier. Like you just mark and you make some modifications, and I don't know.
Mhm.
Would be it's a interactive object too, right?
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
It's one of the reasons I love for stuff like Zarchov's work. I really love PDFs because then I can just make a copy and completely rip it up, delete all the rooms I'm not using because Zarchov loves those random room generators. Assemble all the details for the rooms I'm using, get rid of everything I'm not using. Uh, include any of my own notes. So, like the original map of the town you get from dropping dice in Scenic Dun's Mouth, or the original layout of the cards in
yeah.
Price of Evil. Um, and then I just either copy and paste, or just make a new copy of the PDF and delete pages that we're not referencing. And that's, I think, for that is just kind of my favorite thing to do with PDFs, and one of the reasons I get kind of excited about PDFs there. But it's been a long
Yeah.
time since I played something that had a lot of read or GM something that had a lot of read text in it, um, and I don't miss it. I feel
Yeah.
like a well written room introduction, GM focus, tells me what I need to know, and from there I can start sort of having a dialogue with the players about what's here.
Yeah, exactly, because it forms a dialogue. Because you're just reading it, there is no dialogue. It's just a monologue or something. But if you're
Right.
using your own words and describing, and someone can ask something and respond, it's more interactive. I think it's even more immersive. Even though
Right.
boxed tests have all this pretty and well written text, uh,
Uh-huh.
sometimes it's break from the normal conversation that is the gameplay, and it
Yeah.
feels
Yeah. Yeah.
artificial.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Richard, now we're getting into the more personal part of the interview, and I
Uh-huh.
ask questions about your experiences and things that you do and like. So,
Mhm.
have you ever had any experience with the supernatural? Like, have you ever seen a ghost, or uh,
I
went
have.
to?
Yeah. I have not. Um, not in a way that could not be otherwise explained. Um, very easily otherwise explained. Um, I've
Have,
certainly, done like active visualization while meditating, because I'm old and from the 90s, and that's, what we did there. Um, but I've never had like a standout specifically supernatural event.
you were talking about active visualization in meditation. How
Yeah.
does that work? What is that?
It's really was a strategy that was pretty popular, I think, for the 80s, 90s, probably going back earlier than that. Like is I read about it from books from the 80s, but it's a, where you sort of meditate and you sort of pick an image to focus on. And there's some people who would be like really focused on like, oh, this is an image of a thing I want to accomplish. So it's like building sort of a vision board in your mind. Um, and that was active visualization. Uh,
Okay.
and as anything where like you're intensely meditating, you're going to continue to see things or continue to have visual impressions once your eyes are open and you're moving around. But I think that's
Yeah.
the only time I've ever seen something or had a vague impression of seeing a thing that wasn't there. Um,
And
so
how was that experience for you? Can you share with
yeah, I
us
feel like it was
a little
a
bit how what
yeah,
was your meditating on or visualizing, and how did that manifest in your life? What
yeah,
changed?
yeah, yeah. It was something I kind of experimented with a little bit in the '90s, uh, as I was, but that sort of lost track of it as a meditative practice, in favor of practicing silence or other things, and really honestly has been a long time since I had an active meditation practice, or really tried to focus on meditation. um, and I feel like other meditation practices had probably better results for my attention span and my mood and all the other things that we sort of associate with good meditation practices.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, but that was the only time I ever sort of encountered something that could have theoretically been supernatural. Um,
Yeah. Do you have any other weird experiences, maybe with other kinds of meditation, or have you
Mhm.
ever been hypnosed or had even a near death experience or anything like this?
I have never had a near death experience other than getting myself into, you know, there's definitely moments. So I've been hit by a car long
Wow.
ago, galaxy far, far away. Um, and it reminds me of every time I've been in a really threatening, dangerous situation. Is I don't black out in the sense that I pass out, but I have no memory of what happened for about 5-10 seconds on either side. There was a few years ago, I was at the beach and I went way too far out, um, and then just sort of like lost, very suddenly lost all my energy, and like needed to call for help from shore because there was a tide coming in, and I'm not a particularly great swimmer and had no business being that far out. Um, and ended up just walking into shore myself after I had another surge of energy come back. Um, but there's definitely a period like in all those memories where I remember starting to panic in one, and then not really remembering anything for like 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds in there, before suddenly I was like standing in shallow enough water and walking
Wow. Yeah.
forward, um, and greeting people who were like coming out to see if I was okay. Um, then there, and that was much like getting hit by a car. Like there was, I remember realizing that the car was going to hit me, and then the next thing I remember, I'm on the ground. I have no, ever since that day, I've never had any memory of anything that happened for like the
Wow.
10 seconds.
Yeah.
I know what other people have described to me happening, uh, but I have no memory of what actually happened for those 10 seconds.
And
Between the time like I realized I was going to get hit and the time I ended up on the ground. So I really can't tell you
yeah.
what I did or what I thought because I have no memory. Um,
Yeah. It's weird, right? And
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
Would you want to remember, or are you happy not remembering it?
The second one, I wish I could remember because I was like, what did I actually do to get
Yeah.
myself out of that situation? Because I just remember feeling like my muscles had suddenly gotten so tired I just couldn't do anything. Um, and like the tide was coming in and the water was getting slightly deeper for where I was. Um, and then all of a sudden I was close to shore. Uh, so that's
Yeah.
I have no I have
You
I was
might
like,
have
what did
turned
I
into
do? What would I
a
do in
superhero when you don't know, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So unfortunately, no one saw me fly or anything like that,
Yeah.
or like disappear or anything like that. They just, but like what was going on in my head? How did I get my energy back? Um, so
Yeah.
there was like how did that happen? Um, so in both cases, yeah, there was no manifestation of supernatural powers because other people would have seen those. Um,
Yeah, of course, of course. I'm just,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, but I was thinking like, gosh, that would have been really great to like as a moment to
Yeah.
like develop supernatural powers. Uh, but that's when that is one of the reasons why when writers sort of have that like kind of blackout moment in fiction where you can't quite piece together what happened from a few seconds. I feel very sympathetic to those characters because it's just like I have had that happen.
It
Uh,
happens, right? It is
yeah,
real.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like you don't pass that,
And
you just don't remember anything.
yeah. And talking about maybe other real experience, have you ever had an experience with altered states of awareness, be it through rituals or use of psychedelics or music or even faith or anything like this?
We talked a little bit about all active visualization. Um, I find that for the most part, altered states that sort of come up on me from psychedelics tend to be a little more nerve wracking than
Mm,
relaxing. And less because of what
really?
I'm seeing, less because of what I'm seeing is that more that sort of dream state awareness that like this is not really happening, but you're really experiencing it. Sort of like kind of raises my anxiety level a little bit. Uh,
Mm,
I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's just that kind of vague
yeah.
sense of
Well.
I
Yeah.
know this isn't really real, but I'm really experiencing it, and so I'm not sure what to do with that. Sort of like how to process
Yeah.
this. Uh, so I
When
can I
when
take
you
psychedelic
when
doses.
did you experience this? Were you like in a safe and relaxed place? Because sometimes, yeah, that can be
Mhm.
really anxiety. But I mean, when I
Yeah, no,
do those this like in the forest or something, it's really
no, 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 no. I
way
was,
more relaxing,
like,
right?
it tends to
Yeah.
be like it's only happened when like I've had a slightly too high dose, and I usually like when I wake up. Um, like
Yeah.
so there's probably a little bleed in from dreams and things I
Hmm.
experienced in dreams, sort of like bleeding into. Uh, there's that. I don't know if other
So.
people have this. My experience of psychedelics is usually like there's this vague memory of having experienced something. Um, it's like but I'm remembering like a split second. I'm remembering that I've heard something like a split second after hearing it, but I don't actually remember hearing it. I don't know if that's a good summary of that, but that's been my sort of like experience of psychedelics is that sense of like I vaguely remember having had these experiences like a half a second ago.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's been my experience of psychedelics. Uh, when I take a dose higher than I normally do, and like microdosing has been like a
Do you
great
do
thing.
microdosing?
Yeah, yeah. So microdosing of both THC and amanita. I don't use LSD, but THC and amanita both have a uh, fly agaric have done great things for my trouble sleeping and anxiety and
Yeah,
things like that. As long as I keep the doses pretty under control.
for sure. Yeah. I first time I did mushrooms was microdosing. Like was having anxiety attacks and all sorts of
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
problems, and I was prescribed like controlled drugs and medicine, and my friend that was taking them said, no, don't take this, try something else first, maybe it works for you, and pointed him
Right.
out to microdosing, and then made really big difference for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And what about dreams? Like, do you dream a lot? Do you
I
draw ideas from dreams, or?
don't draw a lot of my ideas from dreams because I don't have a good track record of remembering my dreams. I feel like once or twice a year I'll have a dream I sort of remember.
No, yeah, it's like me.
Maybe
Like
it's
we say
me.
here that
Yeah.
some maybe we dream while awake so much, like and
Yeah. Yeah.
we use up all the dream energy when we go to sleep. There is none there.
Yeah, yeah. No, I will remember vague impressions of a dream, but usually not any concrete images or references, or very, very vague. And the longer I stay awake, the more likely they are to fade.
Yeah,
And it's not even enough to really justify keeping a dream journal.
yeah.
Uh,
I barely remember. Like, just as you said, like once or twice a year, I will have something really impactful, and then I will
uh,
remember. But most of the time, it's just, yeah, I slept and then I woke up, and that's it.
yeah, I'll
And
remember seeing a friend in a dream, but I won't remember what happened.
yeah. Richard, do you have any religion or
Mhm.
spiritual practice, or do you follow any sort of philosophy that helps you guide you through life, through different moments and hard decisions?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I am not a regular member, but I am an, a sometime member, a long term, occasional, irregular attending member of St. Lydia's Church here in Brooklyn, which is a queer identified and feminist congregation. Um, in That's sort of hosted by Lutherans, but is very much a kind of independent minded uh, uh, community, um, and that has been a really, especially during lockdown. I had been particularly inactive leading up to lockdown, um, as I was needing to travel more, to kind of like try to kick off an RPG career and catch up on work on weekends when I was doing RPG stuff during the week. And during lockdown, our video based meetings were really, really, really important to me. Um, and But shared meals, music, and silence are really sort of really important parts of spiritual practice that I kind of inherit from St. Lydia's. Um,
Can
and
you
so it's
talk a little bit
really,
about them? Like you said, shared
yeah,
meals, music,
yeah.
and silence.
Yeah, um, I think my particular brand of neurodivergence is very anti-silence. My brain never wants to be quiet. So, but learning to quiet my brain, um, has been one of the reasons I initially started practicing meditation, to try to like kind of soothe my brain. Never made me more productive, but certainly made me calmer. Um, and I feel like moments, in practicing moments of long silence or sort of focused music, I think, especially like slow music, is a kind of internal silence because it's shutting down all the other kind of noise that's firing off in your brain. Um, and then shared meals are something that have been ultra important to me. I'm sort of by instinct a reclusive person. So when I get to spend time with people, uh, getting to do a sit down and have a conversation over a meal, is way more enriching, fun, connecting than trying to do structured icebreakers or trying to have like a networking conversation or um,
Oh yeah.
getting together, like, you and I got together over beer every time we get to see each other. Uh,
Yeah.
and just that sort of like sitting down and having a drink or a meal or something together is just has been, I think St. Lydia's helped sort of open that up as a spiritual practice. Um, in a it opened up the notion that that is a spiritual practice, making a discipline to sit down and meet people, whether you know them or whether they're strangers, um, in a very organic sort of like let's have a meal together sort of way.
That's nice.
So,
Do they have like meals where the congregation like once
yeah,
a week goes there and then
the
share
entire
meals and
service at St. Lydia's is shaped around a meal. So,
nice.
uh,
Very very nice. And it is a great way to connect people and
mhm.
share life like because what is a meal if not like we are
Right.
nurturing ourselves together. So it's a great practice for sure.
Yeah, there's a
And
occasionally dorky, but in moments in that long poem, it's a longer poem. It's a little dorky, but it's a fairly insightful poem by Joy Hiro about the world begins. That begins with the line, "The world begins at a kitchen table," um,
yeah.
and talks about the world ending at a kitchen table. Um, and I feel like that's been sort of eye opening for me over the past, I guess, 13 years since I started attending St. Lydia's. So. I grew up in an evangelical church and then sort of left that behind and was mainly, drifting in and out of various Protestant groups in the U.S., more mainline, uh, less conservative Protestant groups in the U.S. Um, and so, St. Lydia's felt like a good fit
Yeah.
there, and was kind of an important part of kind of getting me back into New York City when I moved back 13 years ago. Seems like forever, um, but I only came back 13 years ago. So
Yeah. And it's nice to have a place there as a reference to, as you said, like, you met this as you moved in, so you had shared meals. You can,
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
a family away from home in a way, or not,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's
And
I
I've
think
seen the
that's the thing that
congregations.
I miss much about having a church was this group,
Yeah,
and yeah,
and I think to a certain extent, RPG groups are also
it is kind of
uh,
yeah,
a little bit like that because there's a certain randomness to your RPG group, much like a certain randomness to a faith community. Like you never quite know exactly who's going to show up and how you're going to connect with them. And it's one of the reasons I really love public play and conventions. Is I really love sitting down at a table with people I don't know yet, because I'm not naturally an extroverted person. I'm at all, and
hmm
structured ways to try to meet people or introduce you to people always sort of like backfire
yes,
for me mentally.
yeah,
But just sitting down to play a game or have a meal, uh, sort of like opens me up in a
yeah.
way to sort of encountering other people.
Yeah, because you're not there only meeting people. You're playing the game, and it's
Yeah,
kind of a concept meeting the people. So it's kind of easier. It's kind of what you talked about having these projects to guide you through the fog. And yeah,
yeah,
I'm here playing a game, but yeah, I'm also making friends and meeting people. But this is
right.
helping me not getting all over the place. And yeah.
I'm encountering people I
And
otherwise would not encounter in the scope of my daily life.
oh yeah, for
Um,
sure.
yeah,
And well, I've met you. Like I'm here in Brazil. I'm meeting all these
uh,
wonderful people, all because of RPGs, right?
yeah, yeah, definitely.
R-
Yeah, yeah.
Richard, now getting into the last questions of the show, which are more whimsical, more kind of silly, but it's kind of a way to get to know you uh, in a different way. So, if you could choose any superpower to have, what superpower would you choose, and what would be the first thing you would do with it?
Um, gosh, uh, I think it's got to be flying because um, I am normally nervous of heights and not a great flyer in airplanes, but I always love the notion of just sort of drifting on my own, sort of under my own control, when we've removed the possibility of falling, and sort of getting that vision of like everything. Um, so it's got to be flying, uh, and purely for the aesthetics of flying. Every super team ends up all flying anyway. Every super team has to, you can't operate together with the flying characters if somebody doesn't develop a way for all the non-flying characters to also fly. Uh,
Yeah.
so just start with flying and sort of like proceed from there. Uh, I think the one I always default to when I play Cyrun or other sort of like super powered focus games is teleportation. And that may just be because I'm constantly late, and like skipping the commute would be really fantastic. Just being able to just like not worry about the
Yeah.
commute would just be really fantastic.
I don't know. I think even people with teleportation would be late because when e- every time, like when I studied in high school, there were this friend that lived in front of the school. He lived in front of the school. He always arrived
It
late
was like,
because he
yeah,
was, well, I can get there anytime I want. So he's always postponing. Like when I was in college too, people that lived in college was always late for classes. You know?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe teleportation would make you arrive even later in some way. Like, yeah, I can teleport there, so I'm just, Richard, if
Yep.
you could choose any weird and supernatural or fantastical thing from fiction, whether it is from games or from movies or from
Mhm.
comics, and make it real in our world, what would you choose to make it real and why? It can
Oh, that's
be
a
a
great one.
faction, NPC, or a power or entity, a location, anything.
Um, Gosh, yeah. I I'm gonna show my roots in White Wolf and say I really would just love it if we actually had an underground group of mages, sort of living in the world, not running it. I could live without the technocracy, but like mages themselves as people sort of navigating the world with this sort of like a. So I'd love to see mages become real. Um, and obviously, honestly, some days I'd love to see marauders from Mage the Ascension become real. The people who just sort of like have these whimsical, uh, overwhelming sense of real of little reality bubbles, that they just sort of carry with them, and they just kind of impose on the world around them. That would probably be a nightmarish. Uh,
We kind of do that already, like these bubbles of people believing absurd things.
yeah, 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 yeah.
It's kind of like this already in a way.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We already have social media. Uh,
Yeah, not in a
I
good
think,
way, but we do
yeah.
have it.
It
Yeah,
would be interesting for marauders to be more interesting than social media people, where they actually sort of like can create the cool little weird world that
yeah,
they
oh yeah.
live in around them. Uh, I feel like the other one would definitely be, man, it would be great to sort of like start your career at first level and just know what you were going to do for the next 19 levels or 39 levels of your life, until suddenly you become immortal. Um,
Yeah, or you have this clear path to leveling up and getting better, right?
yeah,
Would
yeah, yeah.
be so much easier. Oh, all I have to do is do this, get XP, and I will get there.
Right, right,
Yeah,
right, 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 right. Yeah,
yeah,
and you get some choices along the way. Do you want to be a knight? Do you want
yeah,
to be like a
yeah.
paladin?
Prestige classes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
would would be easier for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Um,
Finally,
yeah. Go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, you.
Yeah, I was asking. The final question that we was asking is do you remember the last time you felt really happy and grateful for being here and being alive? And if you do, can you share it with us? When was that, and how was that for you?
Yeah, I'm trying to pinpoint exactly when it was. I think it was this incredible, like, I have tons of questions about the movie, and I certainly understand lots of critiques about them. But getting to go with friends to just watch Boy and the Heron, um, the recent Miyazaki movie, uh, was because, and it was a theater I'd not been to in a long time, since like pre-lockdown. And it was where I saw the last movie before lockdown really that I saw before
Wow.
lockdown went into effect. Um, and just seeing a really sort of like deeply emotional Miyazaki movie in that theater. And I, again, understand tons of questions and criticisms people have about the movie, but just being able to sit there and watch that in there was such a powerfully joyful experience. Um, because it was
Yeah.
sort of like it was just sort of like just being able to sit in a place I had sat before and resume doing a thing that I really enjoyed doing.
Are you do you like to go to the movies a lot? Do you like
It was one thing I really had started doing a lot right before lockdown, and I have not gotten back into doing it. Like I've done it.
yeah.
I've been to the theater a few times, but I've not
Yeah.
resumed
I think
really
everybody
putting myself
reduced it,
into
like,
theater theater.
because
Yeah.
we got so used to streaming. Like, there is so
Yeah.
much stuff to watch,
Yeah.
like so much. My list is on Netflix Max, and it's gigantic list of stuff that I want to watch,
Yeah.
and I can't. It's too much. I won't watch everything. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And there's even movies, so it's hard. So I want to watch more movies, but I've reduced it a lot, and
Yeah.
I don't know why. Well, Richard, those were all the questions I had prepared. I'm very thankful for being here and sharing your experiences, your story, your journey, your
Mhm.
process, and it was great. I've learned a lot. I'm gonna try writing, sprinting, for sure. I'm gonna talk to some friends here and see if we can go
Nice.
to a cafe or some place and just do that there for an hour or something. So thank you very much. And do you have
Thank you.
any last message to give to the wonderful weirdos out there that are
Oh
watching us
gosh.
or
Uh,
listen to us? I mean,
I hadn't thought of a last message. Gosh. Uh, yeah, I was going to jokingly say bye Roseville Beach. But I feel like, just
do
keep,
go by
yeah,
Roseville Beach and
who goes
Sherwood.
by
Yeah,
Roseville Beach. But also just keep mashing stuff together. Just keep, culture in a friggin' blender. And eventually you're going to get a really good smoothie. You're going to have
nice.
a lot of misadventures along the way, but eventually you're going to get something really good.
Yeah, that's great advice. And Richard, would you mind take us out saying the catchphrase of the show? Keep it weird, everybody.
Keep it weird, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Weird Games and Weirder People. If you'd like to keep up with the show, please subscribe to be notified when we release new episodes. If you'd like to support us, please leave a review or head on to code-fi.com/WGNWP. See you next time, and remember, weird is the new wonderful.